Alright, so Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And we've reached the final topic of chapter 9 on the types of research. Okay, so the final topic will be historical research. Now this is exactly taken from the book, so let's go through what the book says. I think it will be clearer for you to look at on your notes. Okay, now case study, ethnographic and historical research. Right, so in this type of research, some aspects of the past are studied. Okay, this is an important note. Aspect of the past, either by perusing documents of the period or by interviewing individuals who lived during that time. Right, so it's either by looking at documents that we can obtain from the period that we're studying, or we interview students who are still living and who lived during that time. For example, if we interviewed war veterans that lived during the World War II, right? And then afterwards, the researcher attempts to reconstruct as accurately as possible what happened during that time and to explain why it happened. Okay. Now, last note for this paragraph, it is an extensive inquiry into the past and its relation and relevance to the present. Okay, so let's look at the purposes of historical research. Okay, we have few variety of reasons here. Number one is to make people aware of what has happened in the past so that they may learn from past failures and success. We do this all the time. We learn from our own mistake, but your mistake is not significant enough for anyone to conduct a historical research. Maybe in terms of politics, if I were to give you an example, people learn from their mistakes in the past, like what happened to UMNO in Malaysia. They used to be very successful and then they lost, and then they learn from their mistakes. Right, number two, to learn how things were done in the past, to see if they might be applicable to present day problems and concerns. Right, I think this is clear cut. I don't need to explain much on this. Okay, say for example, you don't know how to build a very solid structure, right? But you have some sort of a proof from the past, like for example, the pyramid. So you take whatever you can from the historical monuments of the pyramid and maybe learn a thing or two from the structure of the building so that you can use it at the present day, as a present day problems and concerns. Number three, the purpose of having a historical research according to the book is to assess and prediction. Right? So, for example, you don't know what will happen if you eat too many durians. Right? Instead, the result can be obtained from two means. One, you conduct the experiment on your own, or you can read what has happened in the past. Okay? Right? History also tells you or information that you can use as a hypothesis. Say, for example, you want to test whether or not you can dip a finger into a boiling water, right? You know from the past that if you put your finger into boiling water, it might you might burn your finger. So because of that, you can create a hypothesis based on the historical information. And it is also important, its purpose is also important to understand the present educational practices and policies more fully. Now, what does this mean? Policies are usually written because of certain cases that happened in the past. So, for example, today students are wearing black shoes. Students in schools are wearing black shoes, right? Okay, and then you don't understand, you don't know why are students wearing black shoes today. So you might want to obtain information from the person why do Malaysia has such policies to begin with. Now, let us look at the type of historical writings. So, the first one that we have in your book is historiography. Now, historiography is basically a study of methods, interpretation, and conclusion of historians. So, you study historians and its development over time. Alright, so what you study is the historian's subjectivity, and then you study also the external criticism in recording and interpreting history of that historian, and you analyze the historical approach of that historian over time. Right? So we have an example here. Right? This is a study on Roman historian. So this piece of writing is called a historiography. Pardon me. Right. Secondly, we have primary source analysis. So this type of writing will be a form of analysis of the content of primary sources in order to draw a conclusion on its significance, impact, and consistency. What are primary source analysis? They include letters, interviews, okay, which is oral histories, photographs, government records, and other relevant documents from the past. So you analyze the primary source from the past. Right? The third type of writing will be a historical overview. Right? So it is an overview of a specific history in a specific time or period. Right? So since this is an overview, so usually it contains one or more perspective. It might be a historical overview of UMNO, for example. So that includes the politics of UMNO. Of course, it's politics. The overview of Malaysian history will include a lot of things: politics, sociology, economy, and so on and so forth. Right. The fourth one is a comparative historical study. Right, so just like what the term said, it is a form of writing where you try to compare any period, event, and issues in history. Okay, say for example, you compare UMNO in the past and UMNO after their defeat a few years ago. And then lastly, you have an interpretive argument. So in this style of writing, you will generate new theoretical interpretation and analyze about a field of study. So it is used to give an interpretation of history. Right? I think that is clearly mentioned or clearly defined. Now, lastly, let's look at the evaluation of historical research, looking at the advantages and disadvantages of historical research. Right? So the main advantage or the principal advantage of historical research is that it permits an investigation of topics and questions that can be studied in no other way. It is the only, this is an important point, the only research method that can study evidence from the past. Right? In addition, historical research can make use of a wider range of evidence than most other methods, except for ethnographic study or ethnographic research, because we remember what ethnographic is. You become a person who studies a culture and then you blend into the culture, you stay with the culture. And a case study research, because you're not studying a case, you're studying a piece of history. And finally, let's look at the disadvantage of historical research. One of it is that the measure used in other methods to control for threats to internal validity are simply not possible in historical studies. So in historical research, you cannot study the internal validity. The internal validity refers to cause and effect, which are the experimental research where you can manipulate the cause so that you would know its effects. These are something concerning the independent variables and the dependent variables. So you're not manipulating anything here, you're just studying what had happened in the past. Right. Some of the limitation that you have is in terms of the sample of the document. Okay, you cannot ensure the representativeness of the sample and check the reliability and validity of the inferences made from the data available, because you cannot manipulate the variables. Right, all you can do is, again, I'm explaining this again, I'm repeating this again, you can only look at what had already happened. Right, and another limitation would be, or another disadvantage would be, there would be a possibility of bias due to the researcher's characteristic. A famous saying about history goes like, if I'm not mistaken, history is written by the victor. Right? So, a historian usually, I hope I'm not offending any historians here, there will be a form of bias in writing history, because if you win the war, the one who writes the history would be the winner of the war. So that's why there's a tendency for the history to be biased. And also, conducting a historical research requires much more than digging up good material, because in order for you to study the whole history, it demands a broader array of skills, like you need to be a linguist. Okay, say for example, you are reading documents written from the year thousands of years ago, so it might not be written or understood as the present day for the present day people. And then you also need to be a chemist or an archaeologist, right? Okay, I think everything is clearly mentioned. You can read them on your own. I think my purpose here is to read them to you and then try to give you an example and then explain or elaborate it in a bit more detail so that you will understand better what was already given or what was already written in your book. Alright, so thank you very much. That was the end of chapter 9. Assalamualaikum.